The Football Show on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power's Save Our Game. England's goals totalled 110k for Irish football. Gamble responsibly. Gamblingcare.ie.
I'm prepared to do anything I can to play for my country again.
Do it then. What about your start to the game?
It wasn't bad, was it?
Why should an honest answer be a mistake?
How can a modern day manager not have a mobile phone?
Why should he?
Yeah, we got a good football show for you this evening. Marcela, Mora, Araujo will join us later on to talk about success for Lionel Messi at last. But first, there is more to discuss when it comes to the Euros. We talked a lot about England yesterday, not too much about the actual champions in Italy. So to do so, very happy to say, we have Gabriele Marcotti on the line. Gab, how you doing? Thanks for the time.
Great, thanks for having me on.
It was a brilliant game, we should say, on Sunday, by the way, wasn't it? Thoroughly absorbing right from the off.
I thought so. I thought it was interesting to see, since we want to talk more, you said we want to talk more about Italy, how, having taken that, they say there's that Mike Tyson quote about everybody having a plan until they get punched in the face. And Mancini goes out there with his plan and gets punched in the face, metaphorically, after 2 minutes with a Luke Shaw goal. And little by little, Italy worked their way back in, and he makes substitutions, moving Insigne into a central position, sending on Berardi as well, to really go and obviously taking off Immobile, to go and moving to that diamond, to kind of get themselves back into the game, create a bunch of chances, get the equalizer. And really, I thought they were on top most of the rest of the way. Now, we don't want to go down the England route because you guys have talked too much about England, but I'm sure some people will say, well, was it Mancini being clever, or was it Southgate kind of being piss poor and, offering a rerun of 2018 against Croatia?
And where are you on that spectrum?
I think both things can be true, but the one thing, I have trouble criticizing Southgate because I really like him as a person. I've said many times, though, he's a far better person than he is a football manager. He stayed true to his ideals of setting up uber defensively in this tournament, went even further in the final by adding Kieran Trippier and taking off one other attacking player. And look, if you want to play games where, you go out and you defend yourself you defend with 8 men, and I'm adding Mason Mount to that because all he was asked to do is basically go and press the Italy midfield, and just attack with, Harry Kane and Raheem Sterling and nobody else, when, you've got Sancho and Foden and Grealish and God knows what else on the bench, and, that's your call. I think it's wrong. I think he did it because he saw that France won a World Cup playing essentially that day. Well, that way. Well, the big difference, of course, is that France had Mbappe and the 2018 version of Griezmann and Paul Pogba setting them up in midfield, and England didn't.
On Mancini, so I take your point on the substitutions on the night. Big picture, what has he done so well over the last couple of years? Because I think everybody is well aware at this stage, Italy were not at the World Cup in 2018, which was just an unthinkable low ebb for a country like Italy. So big picture, what's Mancini done here, Gab?
So I think big picture, there's really two things that spring to mind. One is, I know it's a cliche, and when teams go away, and obviously everybody gets along and it's a band of brothers. But literally every Italy player you talk to emphasize that point over and over again. So I tend to believe them. He really created a tremendous group of players who trusted each other, who got along with each other. There was zero controversy over playing time, even when, things got a little wobbly, even when people lost their place, like Berardi or Florenzi relative to the first game, like Locatelli as well. That was obviously really, really big. And I think the other thing, though, more practically on the pitch, is Mancini looked around and said, all right, what works in modern football? What kind of football do the best teams, the ones we admire, the most successful ones, what kind of football do they play? And they play like Manchester City, or they play like Bayern Munich, or they play like Liverpool. They demand the ball. They want the ball. When they do defend, they defend high up the pitch to try to get it back. They're aggressive, and they try to get as many of their talented players on the pitch as possible. Kind of the opposite, come to think of it, of the Gareth Southgate approach. Now that works at club level, but he said, let's try to do this with a national team. We have an opportunity here because we don't have that many superstars right now. We have a situation where maybe for the first time in their history, Italy's best players were in central midfield, their most talented players, not up front and not at the back. Obviously, Bonucci and Chiellini were great players, and they were great again in the tournament, but they're also very old. He did it. He bought into it. He found a way to do it. Obviously, now Italy are 34 games undefeated, one away from the record. And then this is very significant because this isn't part of Italian football culture. It's not how Italy went and, won the 4 World Cups that Italy did win beforehand. Italy always won, as you know, by counterattacking well, by having outstanding individuals who could create something out of nothing, usually up front, by playing on the break, by defending deep and defending stout. And he realized that Italy were not equipped to do that, certainly not for 90 minutes. And he chose a different way of playing, and people bought into it, and people loved it, and people had fun, and they were courageous, and they played. They played with no fear, and that's something that we hadn't seen from the Italy national team in a long time. I mean, I'll tell you what, Italy won the World Cup in 2006. I thought they played very good football, but they played with fear. They used that fear to motivate them, but they were certainly not a carefree team. And they were world champions. So it's not that one way of playing is good and one way of playing is bad. It's that Mancini was able to introduce a new way of playing and was able to get results with it.
Courageous is a very good word, because if you look at Bonucci and Chiellini and you look at their comparative lack of pace to most central defensive partnerships who have ambitions of winning tournaments, if you were to say to them at the off, we're going to press high, we're going to be quite attacking, Spinazzola and Di Lorenzo will flood forward at every opportunity, I could see them looking at each other thinking, well, this does not sound like we're going to have a good time. But they obviously were on board with that too.
Yeah, and I have to say, I'll hold my hand up here and say I was wrong about them. They were my biggest concern going into the tournament. I made the point that I thought, maybe we should see more of Acerbi, and we did in the second and third game, or of Bastoni, of other defenders. Maybe it's a mix and match situation. Because at Juventus, Bonucci didn't have a great season. Chiellini was always injured, but they're used to defending deep. They're used to just defending deep, having guys around them. Now they were asked to patrol vast areas of the pitch. Di Lorenzo has plenty of pace, of course, and is very athletic, but, he really, and so did Spinazzola while he was still there. But, those are fullbacks or wingbacks in the case of Spinazzola. And Mancini's system demanded that they attack up the pitch. They tweaked it a little bit. Di Lorenzo did a lot less attacking later in the competition, and often became almost like a third center back, mopping things up with his pace. But yeah, it's a credit to Bonucci and Chiellini, frankly, that they would go out and buy into it and find a way to make it work. Because, it's one thing to tell them at 22, hey, you got to play this way. It's another thing at, 34 and 36 respectively, to try and get them to play in a system that, on paper is almost designed to make them look bad.
I had Chiellini all wrong before this tournament, which is a terrible thing to say about a 36-year-old. It's not like he's new on the scene here. Grizzled defender who celebrates big defensive moments. Sure, I got all that. Loves defending. I got all that. I didn't have him down as the type who would be bear-hugging Jordi Alba before a penalty shootout, and seemingly has this carefree attitude, and the scenes of him giving Harry Maguire a big high five before the final as well in the tunnel. Big smile, kind of like almost a Joker type character. I did not have Chiellini in that department at all.
No, I mean, look, you're not the only one. You don't blame yourself. This jokey, slightly mad Chiellini and it's not just mind games. I've spoken to people in the camp. He's like this every day because he knows the clock is ticking on his career and he knows he's got nothing to lose. And so he says, I'm going to enjoy every moment. Younger Chiellini, obviously probably better Chiellini in many ways, was a different player. And he wasn't very popular with a lot of people, partly because he was a Juve guy. And, unless you're a Juve fan, you most likely don't like Juventus, partly because he's the kind of guy, he could be dirty and can still be dirty. But he was also somebody who was often whingy, often complaining to the referee and whatnot. And, he saw it as part of his job. And again, I go back to Mancini. He said, we're not going to lose our cool. We're going to try to be positive out there. I want positivity from you. And he got that in spades with Chiellini, maybe even too much with the joking and the smiling. I remember one scene, which really struck me was, I think it was in extra time. Raheem Sterling made a great run into the Italy box. Somehow Chiellini stopped him. And afterwards, Chiellini celebrated by the fist pumping, the jumping around and a big smile on his face. And even Raheem Sterling, as he was jogging back, he was smiling too. That kind of environment, it's hard to capture that sort of lightning in a bottle.
Yeah. I mean, look, the whole world collectively laughed at his drag back of Saka as well. On Sunday, I mean, it was comical. But you have no doubt it's improving his performances. You've captured it there perfectly. He is playing like a guy who knows the clock is ticking and I am going to enjoy every single moment, and that hangs over everything, and it's evident in his performances. On Mancini and on Vialli, there was a great piece by Graham Souness in the Sunday Times at the weekend. Souness was at Sampdoria when they were young players, and Souness was an elder statesman, effectively trying to help a Sampdorian team along. That was how Souness put it anyway. And he said Mancini at 19 knew the answer to everything, had all the answers, and didn't care for your tuppence worth. And those two exchanged a lot of words on the training pitch, apparently. And he said of Vialli that Vialli was, by contrast, a student of the game. He hung on your every word. He was desperate to learn. He worked harder than Mancini, intelligent, calm, good with people. So how much have they changed in the intervening 30, 40 years?
Well, it's fun. I mean, and you mentioned Vialli there. I've written 2 books with him. He's somebody I know very, very well. I've known him for 25 years, lives around the corner from me here in London. I think it's an accurate portrayal that Mancini is probably a functioning introvert. He's actually shy except when he's on the pitch. When he's on the pitch, he turns into a beast. And Luca was always the more extroverted one. He was the one who would talk to everybody. But probably, although hope he's not listening, would probably defer to Mancini on the pitch, just because Mancini could be so intense and sometimes be a prima donna. He'd be the first player to say so. Mancini's a guy who, he's the most substituted player in the history of Serie A, partly because on certain occasions when things weren't going his way or when he'd had enough, he'd ask for a change. But when you talk about Mancini, you're also talking about a guy who, when he was 16 years old, he was a starter in Serie A on a mid-table team and scored 9 goals that season, which, back then in Serie A, given how defensive it was, is probably the equivalent of scoring 20 goals this year. He's a guy who was a household name by the time he was 12 years old. Everybody knew about sort of the phenom. He was, I can't think of another young player in Italy who was hyped as much, while being so young. Maybe Roberto Baggio comes close, but there's nobody else. And so, he always had this sense of taking a different path and about being more gifted than everybody else, because he generally was. One of the things Mancini's talked about this is when he went into coaching, he had some of the same struggles that Glenn Hoddle had in trying to work with players, because, he would expect the players to go and then see things on the pitch the way he saw them and do things on the pitch the way he saw them. And players would look at him and see, like, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I can't hit that pass or, I'm never going to be able to see that guy, making that run. And in his words, he had to kind of unlearn football when he became a coach and relearn it from a perspective of a mere mortal or an average professional footballer. I can think of very, very few coaches in the history of the game. Obviously, Johan Cruyff is the obvious one that I can think of. Thank you. Who were that good as footballers and also won things as coaches or managers. There's very, very few. And, I think it takes a Herculean effort to get to that point.
Yeah, it's a great point. His status in Italy, I suspect, this morning is sky high. What was it a year or two ago before this great success with Italy? How was he regarded?
He was regarded as a very good coach who, of course, delivered Inter their first title in many, many years, albeit that was in the wake of the Calciopoli scandal, which meant that, Juventus and Milan were out of commission. What's interesting, and Manchester City fans will remember this, he's remembered, and I think this is one of the things that sets him apart. He's a guy who's played very many different versions of football throughout his career. He's played quite defensive, basic football in some stops. Certainly, when he was at Manchester City, they didn't attack or play the way this Italy team plays. Obviously that came later. Certainly, upon his return to Inter a few years ago, they were much more of a much more defensive team. He really knows his football. He knows his tactics. He knows every different system. And he can tailor his system to what he wants to do in that situation. He's a tremendous coach that way, and he's been successful playing different systems and with different approaches, different philosophies. And then again, I think that's a real credit. He did it with attacking football this time, and maybe in a few years he'll do it with defensive football.
Pretty amazing career now. This is crowning glory moment. It's just exceptional for him. I know you were at Wembley on Sunday. As the dust settles on the madness of Wembley, what are your memories of the scenes inside? I even saw Miguel Delaney writing just this afternoon saying increasingly he looks back and thinks Wembley and all concerned very lucky something more serious didn't kick off. How out of control was it from your vantage point, Gab?
So I have a holiday booked, and I do not want to test positive for COVID before that. So I got there way early. I avoided the crowds, and I was inside. So I can tell you what I saw inside and some of my reporting. I did speak to a lot of people afterwards, because I know a lot of people who went to the game, and you've all read their experiences. Two things struck me. One is there were very obviously far more than the official attendance there. And the reason I think is very obvious. Thousands and thousands, not hundreds, of supporters, of ticketless supporters got in. And once they were inside, they sat in seats that were assigned to other people because, of course, they had timed entry at Wembley. So there were people who broke in, I think, around 6 o'clock, if memory serves. And there were others who were due to take their seats at 7. This happened to friends of mine who, husband and wife, 2 young kids. They get in, their ticket, they paid a lot of money for their tickets. They get to their seats at the appointed time, and there's 4 dudes sitting there, and they refuse to move. And what do you do in that situation? You can go and complain to a steward on minimum wage with a little jacket who's, likely to be some 18-year-old girl. What are they going to do? Very, very few cops inside the stadium. And so what the Wembley stewards did was they went and they sat them in empty seats, as you know. And again, at that point, all this COVID, social distancing, all that crap goes out the window. There's empty seats there because you had social distancing. Well, you had social distancing for a reason, because, you have the highest infection rate in the world in England right now. So, that goes out the window. That was an absolute shambles. And I really hope there is an inquiry and people are held to account. On a personal level, I don't like the fact that, a Wembley spokesman talks to my ESPN colleagues and issues a statement, around 6:30 and says, oh, there was an incident with fans trying to get in, but, there was no security breach and no ticketless fans are inside the stadium. I'm sorry, man. You're like the Iraqi Minister of Information. You, sir, are a liar. And whether you're willingly lying whether you're doing it, because that is the bunk information you were given by your bosses, who are too chicken crap to come out and even have the balls to say, we're still investigating what's going on. We want to ascertain the facts first. That's simply unacceptable. I want names. I want people to come out. This country obviously has a history of terrible things happening at stadiums. And I know Wembley's not Hillsborough, but there's no telling what might have happened. As far as the stuff happening on Wembley Way, I watched the videos like you did. I am a bit shocked, but maybe I shouldn't have been, because similar scenes happened before the Denmark game and the Germany game. And, I accept there is a portion of the support that will always behave this way. I didn't think they would do it. I could see them doing it on away trips, because I've seen them doing it on away trips. Didn't quite expect that they would do it, in their home where they live. But even then, I got to take it back to the police. I can't deal with the police continually saying about how clever they are and how safe their stadiums are. And we've got this wonderful football intelligence. And look, we stamped out hooliganism or whatever. Because you know what? On the day, you weren't there. And on the day, a lot of people were scared. A lot of bad things happened. A lot of worse things could have happened. And you need to do a full inquiry as well. You're very good at going to people at the Sarah Everard vigil and taking candles off of middle-aged women and threatening to arrest them and carting them away. How about you man up and go and deal with it? And don't tell me that there were 300. The minimum security requirement was 300 police and there were 450. You know what? Maybe you're not that smart. Maybe 450, maybe that shouldn't be the minimum security requirement. Maybe all your clever people or experts in crowd control got that one wrong. How about you come out and own it? How about you come out and say, we done screwed up? Because you can't just come out and say, there was a situation and we dealt with it. What the hell did you deal with? I mean, I'm sorry if I get a little annoyed, but, I feel for all the fans who were there, whether they were supporting England or Italy. I feel for the other fans who went up and didn't have tickets and just thought that they would soak up the atmosphere peacefully and have a drink on Wembley Way, because these guys screwed it up for everyone.
I think your anger is well placed, to be honest with you. The whole thing was a thundering disgrace and could have been so much worse. And a few thoughts. This is a country very practiced in hosting big games, so there shouldn't have been any issue. Secondly, it was obvious, even to me sitting in Dublin, just looking at my phone early on, and I mean early on, that London was bubbling and not going in the right direction. So even if they were under-resourced, how they didn't pull in extra resources by 5, 6, 7 o'clock is beyond me. Simon Cooper described the tube station after the game, and it was anarchy, and trying to get home was crazy. And again, COVID was the least of your problems, but it was a super spreader type situation in that tube station. And there was just this air of lawlessness, which must have been terrifying for a bunch of people, like your friends. What do you do when someone is in your seat? I mean, do you confront them? Some people did confront, and that led to messy scenes. I mean, a few of the journalists have made the point that if Luke Shaw hadn't scored early and just lifted the mood and almost proved the great distraction, things could have got ugly. And then the other obvious point, going back to your opening point, is if there had been a capacity crowd at Wembley, then things would have been a whole lot more serious. They are incredibly lucky there was not a capacity crowd there. No,
they locked gates while people were coming in. They got this all wrong, and there were shades of this, again, just a couple days earlier against Denmark, and 10 days earlier against Germany. And this is important because we've all come through a 16 months nightmare, which isn't over yet. And in these situations, we've had to put our trust in our governments and our trust in authority and trust that they made the right decisions. And maybe some were right, some were wrong, I'm sure they were mostly made in good faith. But there has to be accountability to go with it, because when there is no accountability, when there are essentially cover-ups, that's when you lose faith in authority. Why do I have to go listen to some dude just because he has a badge if I don't trust him? That's when things break apart. And that's why I expect, and maybe I'm naive, but I have faith that there will be a serious inquiry into this. This is not a political thing. It's not a Tory Labour thing or whatever. It wasn't Boris Johnson in charge of the logistics, but there has to be accountability. And, while it's very important to go and have a debate, all these other debates that have been happening, people in Italy are incensed that the players took off their medals, their silver place medals. Many of them, as soon as they got them, they thought that was disrespectful. Fine, let's have a debate over that. The talk of racism and visiting number 10, obviously hugely important. But there has to be room to also debate everything that went wrong, because, that could have cost lives, right in the here and there. And that goes much further, in my opinion.
One last point to put to you then before we let you go. There's something just incredibly interesting happening with footballers the last couple of years through their social media accounts, I suppose. Predominantly, Tyrone Mings called out Priti Patel in perfect and succinct fashion. She had been talking about the fans' right to boo the knee and describing the booing of the knee as an example of gesture politics, I would think, less than 2 weeks ago, and then suddenly she's to the fore condemning the racism, and Tyrone Mings held a mirror up to that hypocrisy quite beautifully. And then Marcus Rashford, I mean, it's amazing, even over here you have you wouldn't know Vincent Brown. Sorry, it's a silly thing to bring up, but he's like a brilliant political commentator, broadcaster here, and even he, I don't think he'd be that into Marcus Rashford generally, and he was tweeting about how he must be the most admired person in England at the moment. It was one of those moments. I opened my phone this morning and saw Vincent Brown tweeting about Marcus Rashford and thought, my goodness, this is big, and something interesting is happening here. I mean, you can take it any way you want to take it, but what jumps out to me at the moment is you now have this very vociferous bunch of footballers, very clued in, and you would have to say they're pretty close to the most high profile and powerful, I guess it's soft power, but power nonetheless, powerful bunch of working class and black or people of colour in English life at the moment, and they're sticking it to the government on a fairly routine basis, and the whole country's watching it happen. What are you making of all this? Just the last couple of days, Gab, and then a little bit beyond, because it's been brewing now for a lot of the last 18 months.
I mean, it's an interesting situation. I follow closely what happens across the pond in the US, where obviously a lot of this stuff originated, and where you've had high-profile athletes speaking out there for some time as well. I think none of these people who speak out as athletes are obviously experts in this stuff, in terms of the political aspects. They're not politicians, they're not policy experts, they're not scientists. They're people. And I always feel that when Marcus Rashford talks about stuff, and this is where his critics get it wrong, he's talking about school meals for deprived children, because he was a deprived child who relied on school meals. He's talking about what it means to be a black man in England in 2021, because he is a black man in England in 2021. He's not giving advice on monetary policy. And so for me, those people who talk about, stick to sports, stick to what you know, he's sticking to what he knows. As for the Priti Patel stuff, again, I think Tyrone Mings doesn't need to be a politician to point out when a politician tries to score points with a certain sector of the public. I can give you my own personal view that if Priti Patel had simply said, if people want to boo, that is their right, I wouldn't have an issue with it from her perspective. When she starts talking about the gesture itself, you can't have it both ways. You can't go out and say, you can't say that taking a knee is virtue signaling and the people who boo it are justified in booing it, not just have a right, but are justified in booing it, and then go and condemn racism, because few people have contributed to this poisonous discourse as much as she has. And look, I also feel that it's not just her. I mean, I don't want to get political. I was struck, and I'll just mention this very quickly. There's a man named Dominic Raab, who's a member of cabinet here, who's managed to keep a very, very low profile on this issue probably because he's more intelligent than others, after saying something which I thought was absolutely offensive and despicable at the start of this whole thing. When he was asked about taking a knee, he made a stupid joke saying now he would only do it when he proposes to his wife or first queen. Fair enough. And he said, well, what is that? Something out of Game of Thrones. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, you're either a complete ignoramus who hasn't been paying any attention to the news for the past 12 months, that you don't know what it is and why people do it, that you think that it's something from Game of Thrones, or you're just a really bad, vile person who thinks that you can turn something that is so important and so painful to so many people that they feel they have to do it into your stupid Game of Thrones joke. It's one or the other. And already that is what has divided so many people. If you, the gesture itself, all the other stuff, the BLM stuff, again, if you want to know where it came from, it comes from a white Army veteran who was a Green Beret, a man named Nate Boyer, recommending this to an American football player named Colin Kaepernick 3 years ago. He felt the need to protest during the playing of the national anthem. He said, look, this is a respectful way to do it. I, as somebody who has served my country in the military, who doesn't share your views because I'm very conservative, say to you, if you want to highlight the problem, take a knee. And it says, there is a problem here. That is what the gesture means. And that is at the heart of everything. Dominic Raab doesn't know that. I presume he does now. But to go and politicize this and bring in the Marxism and all this other nonsense, destruction of the nuclear family, it's just ridiculous. And people should know better. And people can have whatever thoughts they want, but they can't then go and score points and, lament the racism and we've gone so far. No. Just shut up and get on with your job and try to be the best Priti Patel you can be.
Yeah. It's just very interesting to see where it all goes. I mean, misplaced power it may be, but those footballers now, in calling her out, generate more headlines and more attention than every single Labour politician calling her out for the next 24 hours straight. We wouldn't be talking about it if Mings hadn't tweeted it. That's the really interesting dynamic at the moment, that they are representatives. Again, misplaced it may be, kicking a football around a pitch gives you that platform, but they're using it like no generation before them. Gab, could talk to you for another hour, but we can't, sadly. Thanks so much. Much appreciated. Gab Marcotti, thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power's Save Our Game. England's goals totaled 110k for Irish football. Gamble responsibly. Gamblingcare.ie.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power's Save Our Game. Is your bookie giving you jack? Then you haven't tried Paddy Power. Gamble responsibly. Gamblingcare.ie.
Okay, so you're welcome back. If you're just tuning in, brilliant stuff from Gab Marcotti there just before the ad break. Well worth listening back to on podcast or on our social channels. Football on Off the Ball is with thanks to Paddy Power's Save Our Game. The England goals totalled a massive €110,000 for Irish football, all with thanks to Paddy Power. For information on responsible gambling, visit gamblingcare.ie. We're turning to Lionel Messi, a winner at last with Argentina after they beat Brazil in the Copa final at the weekend. 16 years after his debut, he has suffered 3 Copa final defeats, a World Cup final defeat, and finally, against Brazil in the Maracanã, he won a major tournament, fell to the floor in relief. And he said afterwards, I can't tell you how happy I feel. Very happy to say Marcela Mora Araujo is with us on the line. At last, Marcela.
At last, yes. I can't tell you how happy I feel. Yes, very good news. It was a long time coming, and I think it's very much Messi's triumph, Messi's victory. I don't, there's. One could say Argentina needed the trophy, the country, the mood, but it's very much his achievement, and you could tell on the pitch the players wanting it to be for him, especially the last few seconds of play. There's a real energy on the pitch going on, and a lot of people in Argentina saying, I wanted this for Messi more than anything. So it feels like it was very much Messi's crowning glory, literally, quite literally.
There aren't too many instances in football where it is all about one player, but this genuinely was one of them. The coach afterwards just spoke about Messi and what it meant for Messi, and how Messi had played with an injury, and Messi's the greatest. And the players at full time, effectively not long after full time, went to Messi and started throwing him in the air in recognition of his contribution. It is so rare where this very selfish sport is about one player, but such is his greatness. Saturday revolved around him. It was all about him.
Yes, in Argentina, we've often had this discussion about Maradona and whether Maradona won on his own, or whether the team, that kind of interaction between Maradona and the rest of the players in '86 and so on. But I think what was going on with Messi now is, in this age of everybody knowing all the time what's going on, especially at club level. So Messi was doing so well with Barcelona. He'd won everything possible individually at club level. And there was this kind of pending assignment with Argentina. And so he became at once the player with the most minutes played this year for Argentina, refusing to go off the pitch at any point, wanting to play absolutely every game, but also a player that was not at all present in what is known as the renovation in Argentina at the moment, which is this kind of new blood, if you like, or a new structure to the Football Association and to the first team for the internationals, where Lionel Scaloni was unexpectedly appointed as an interim manager after the 2018 fiasco when Sampaoli left. And Scaloni, nobody thought would remain particularly long, and had no pedigree, no experience. Nobody, including me, really thought that much would come off it. But it just felt like a nice, calm time when, that he could maybe work with a few players that were young, that were home-based. And Messi didn't appear at all in that formula. And then there was this team that was ready, and he slipped into it. So I think for the young players, it was very much about throwing him up in the air and saying, "Look, we were finally the system that could let you thrive, the one that none of the previous Argentina teams had managed." And for the older ones, his contemporaries, the old guard, Otamendi, Di Maria, Aguero, it was about sharing with him this thing that had eluded them, just eluded them so many times. And in fact, there's a poetic justice about Di Maria scoring as well, because he was really questioned and subject of loads of aggressions from the media, from people. He really, really took the brunt of what some would call failures, and one can only say of all the other times they excelled and reached finals and then just didn't win them. But so there was a perfect balance, I think, of old and new.
Yes.
Really nice, very, very, very good. And I think it's interesting that his club performance, or not performance particularly, but his relationship with Barcelona, waning over the past season, and now literally kind of ending formally his contract while he was playing for Argentina. So it's almost like this thing was lifted off him, and the free agent on paper, free agent on the pitch. He was really a very liberated man, being able to do what he does best.
Marcela, I noted that he has passed Mascherano's record of 150 appearances, so he's at 151. And the story goes, and I don't know how true it is, but it's what we've heard for years, that there is maybe a slightly lukewarm aspect to the relationship between Messi and the Argentinian people. Or if maybe lukewarm is the wrong way of putting it, it's certainly not the visceral adoration that they have for Maradona and the relationship they have for Maradona. I would think if there has been a lukewarm aspect to his relationship, that he is playing every minute, as you say, in his mid-30s for the cause, that he is breaking Mascherano's appearance record, and that he has won this tournament at this stage of his career. That should cement a certain bond and a certain affection there now, no?
Absolutely. I mean, I think rather than a lukewarm relationship with Argentina, which is a very broad category of people to have a relationship with, I think there has been a questioning of his Argentinianness and his commitment. And, you know, fans, that we're the same all over the world, I think. So even Mascherano, who was a hero in 2014 and super respected and kind of had memes of, Che Guevara with Mascherano's face going viral, then became the target of a lot of quite hostile and aggressive vitriol. Messi took it more than any. He's been booed on the pitch. People have been questioning his commitment to, saying, oh, for Barcelona he does this, for Argentina he doesn't appear, he doesn't run, he doesn't turn up at crucial moments. I think that's quietened down completely now because, it's the immediate emotional aftermath of the victory. But also there's a whole generation who had not seen an Argentina win something important. And now they have. And so for them, there won't be this questioning or this relentless comparison with Maradona because they didn't, not many, but there are kids in Argentina aged 12 and below who might say, who is Maradona? When everybody's kind of going,
Sure.
And no one now is going to say who is Messi of that age group. So he has cemented something going forward as well. And there will be critics and there will be people, real football fans who are fans of their club beyond Argentina as well. He isn't adored and revered by everybody, but it's worth saying nor was Maradona. There are a lot of people in Argentina that really didn't like Maradona at all on the football pitch, as a player. So Maradona was extremely divisive. I don't know that Messi's as divisive a personality. I think there was just this sense that if he could achieve so much for Barcelona, how come he couldn't do it for Argentina?
Yes.
And that's been put to bed, A, by him at doing it for Argentina, B, by there being a younger type of football fan that is a lot less kind of testosterone driven about winning, and and who have accepted him as an Argentine hero even without winning any trophies for Argentina. But this is a really good way of silencing them because now he's also given them this.
Yeah, copper fastens the relationship. He's no longer the boy who was plucked by Barcelona and never delivered for Argentina, quote unquote, never delivered. And it would have been so different if he had retired as planned after that 2016 Copa defeat. So this has been a very, very sweet Indian summer for him and Argentina. And I suppose, Marcela, it does beg the question, Italy are European champions and have looked a very, very good team. Argentina, as you said, they haven't won anything in a long time. Their first Copa in 28 years. The World Cup is just around the corner by comparison with normal times. Are Argentina a force to be reckoned with 35-year-old Messi leading this young bunch?
I think if Messi's body's up to it physically, which he has said, if as long as I can physically do it, I want to carry on playing, then for sure, because that we've seen some really interesting talent emerging as well. So what needs to happen is that the rather toxic and complicated stuff that goes on around football, as Bielsa used to say, everything that hasn't got to do with football is unbearable at international level. If that doesn't kind of drain the energy like it did in 2018, then Scaloni has got a great team. He's got Walter Samuel and Pablo Aimar, who are two of the absolute bestest players we've ever had at international level, and who are now working incredibly well with the training youths and training the main team, and a really nice dynamic going on. I mean, I was thinking this over the weekend and seeing everything that was going on with England as well. I wonder to what extent the fact that Brazil is absolutely closed its borders. So there's not only no fans in the stadium, but actually hardly any journalists from Argentina travelled. If that's given them a kind of, slight bubble effect that's allowed them to work really well. And I wonder to what extent leading up to the World Cup they'll get the same thing, because I think the media dynamic is quite intense there. And in fact, they did, when they were celebrating and singing, the players at the Maracana, they were singing against the journalists. And there's a very lovely moment when they start trying to sing against the Brazilians, and then Messi says, no, and walks away, and they're not allowed to be anti-Brazilian, but they are allowed to be anti-media. So, the concepts of who we are for and against are shifting. But it could be a really good Qatar World Cup with a really exciting England young team as well. So it might be that we redefine the England-Argentina fixture as well and turn it into a lovely moment where they all end up embraced and, sharing a giggle instead of shouting obscenities at each other.
Well, listen,
like Messi and Neymar did.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's good to hear journalists are reviled all around the world, Marcela. Great for our profession. Good to know. Thanks so much for your time. Always great to have you on, Marcela, Mora, Araujo. Thanks, Marcela.
Thank you.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power's Save Our Game. England's goals totaled 110k for Irish football. Gamble responsibly. Gamblingcare.ie.